So I'm fresh off a red eye, tired. Not anymore, Anthony. Not anymore. Welcome to Worst Seats in the House. Michael Russo, Anthony LaPanta. Margot's pissed.
She is.
So Margot, even when she's pissed, she's like nice pissed.
Well,
but
she's
today,
nice to you.
She's dropping F-bombs
Right.
and everything. You are in trouble.
Yeah, she's nice to you.
Yeah. So family emergency in the backyard, and you don't pick up your phone for like hours.
It was 1 hour.
She's trying to get in touch with you.
It was exactly 1 hour, in fact. But my phone was dead. It isn't like I just ignored the call. My phone died.
Well, whose phone dies at like 3 o'clock?
No, it was at 5 o'clock that it died, or a little before 5 o'clock, because I missed a call at 5:03. Yeah, I have some charger issues on my phone.
Margot just made such a face that I think she wants to come on the air.
It was, so I have some charger issues on my phone.
Okay.
When I plug it in, if I set it down, oftentimes it stops charging.
I'm having the same issue.
Are you
It's
really?
crazy.
And so I'll wake up in the morning sometimes, it's at like 18%. And then I just know it's going to be a long day because I don't really travel with a charger cord. So hey, does anybody have a charger cord I can borrow for like 8 minutes? So I'll plug it in. But so I thought it was the cord. Margot ordered a new cord. It was exciting. Arrived the next day. I plug it in that night and the same thing happened. But it doesn't happen with my iPad. That charges all night. So I know it's the phone. So the phone died. This will be a little supporting evidence for Margot's argument. I was playing golf today. I was using an app for GPS, which drains the battery faster than normal. And so after I left the golf course, I called Margot to say, hey, here's what I'm doing. I got a couple stops to make. Then I'm going to be home.
She said, you mother...
No, she hadn't. At this point, the tree hadn't fallen. So I just said what time you were going to be here. I was going to go to the gym. I was going to go to Total Wine. I had to stop at my office. Then I'll be home. Well, then my phone died. So I still went to Total Wine. I still went to the gym. And then when I stopped at my office, I had a charger cord. So I plugged it in for a little while and it got the phone powered up enough to at least be able to turn on. And that's when I was able to turn it on and see that an hour earlier, I had missed a call or missed a text from Margot saying, please come home ASAP. A tree fell in the neighbor's pool. Something to that effect. And they're having a pool party in an hour.
Oh, I did not know that part.
Yeah, it was also in the text. So when she couldn't get a hold of me, she got a hold of Vinny. Vinny got a hold of one of his buddies, came over and helped Margot actually move the logs, cut the logs and move them out of the pool party onto our wood pile.
So in 1 hour, Margot was able to cut all that wood?
Well,
that's a lot of wood.
It's not really that much, but I'm not gonna downplay that at this moment.
Oh my God! I wish this was a video podcast.
I'm just saying, like
Margot, it just turned red.
No,
yeah.
I'm amazed too that they got that done in 1 hour. Absolutely dumbfounded.
I mean, it's a full tree.
Well, it is, but you've never cut up trees, so I'm just saying, like,
well, it can't be easy.
It's not easy. It is. I'm not downplaying that part. It isn't easy, but it shouldn't take more than an hour to move that, and that's all I was saying.
Oh man!
But
the looks you're getting with your back to her right now. Well, she, by the way, has a knife in her hand.
You're right. Well, and believe me, I understand. Like, nobody knows nobody knows better when they're in the doghouse than me, and I know I'm already there. So they did a great job moving all these logs over. I walked in about 15 minutes before you and have already had this conversation. So I knew as soon as you got here that it would be I'm happy that it provided some energy for you.
Yes, it woke me
in
up
an
from my
overly
red eye
tired
today.
situation.
Because I had a 1 a.m. flight back from Vegas. I was there out for the NHL media tour. And by the way, welcome to the Aquarius Home Services studio.
If there any trees fall there that were infested by beetles of some kind, apparently?
Yeah. By the way, if you own a charging store or an Apple store and want to sponsor this podcast, we are available. Anthony needs a phone. By the way, our next live show is September 19th, a week from Thursday, I should say. This is coming out Friday at Tuttles, 7 p.m. Come on out for that. It'll be a blast.
Opening night of training camp, opening day of training camp.
Opening night, training camp starts at earlier that day with a very early 3 sessions of the day. You will not be there because you got something going on.
I have a Twins game.
Yeah. And then
I'll be there in spirit. I'll be following your live tweets.
Yes. And breaking news, October 2nd at Elsie's and October 30th at Split Rocks are 2 live shows in October. Bad news for Brock Faber. He was so good in Vegas that he is going to be the go-to media quote machine for everybody in hockey this year. The one thing so he was obviously good with the 3 or 4 writers that he sat down with, but I went out last night with a bunch of people, media people, league people, and every single one of them that were, because the way they do it in Vegas, they're at 3 different places. One, Encore, they've got a ton of stuff to do. Sit down, like NHLPA stuff, video stuff, imaging stuff. Then they go out and do a bunch of videos and on ice podcasts, all that type of stuff. And Henderson at the Silver Knights practice facility, and then stuff out at the Golden Knights practice facility. And all these different people, probably 9 or 10 different people, is like, oh my God, Faber was incredible this weekend. So typical Brock Faber personality. He just came there and like some people don't want to be there. And he just came there wide-eyed and was all excited to show his personality. And that's one reason why the Wild love him.
Which isn't really surprising to us because we've been around him all the time for the last couple of years, and just a great kid, genuine kid. And he's a well-spoken guy. So none of it surprises me.
He was funny. So I asked him, like, why'd you do so much video stuff today? Because the Wild were putting out social media pictures at some of the sites I wasn't out with your glasses on. Like, was that like a joke? He goes, well, forgot my contacts. So pretty funny. So a lot of that was, but then for giggles, they did a lot of that stuff. And some of the pictures and the videos are hilarious. There's going to be a lot of really cool things this year. The one thing I'm looking forward to is the Amazon show that's going to start in November. That it's going to be very much like the F1 series on Netflix, which, a lot of people that watch that show weren't F1 fans, were fascinated by it, and now love F1. And that's the hope here, is that this could be a game changer in hockey. And people that might not be huge hockey fans all of a sudden put on this series and they're like watching the Philip Forsberg series or watching the Connor McDavid series, the Austin Matthews series. They got 9 or 10 ones, and I hear they're going to be unbelievable and completely giving a view of certain players and teams that you've never seen before. Like, I've heard some of the scenes with, some of the stars in this league that are shocking, that you'd never know that this player even had this type of personality.
I'll be curious to see it. I'm one of those that was not a big F1 fan.
Yeah.
It wasn't even like that I wasn't a fan. I just didn't know anything about it.
Yeah.
And when I started watching that Netflix show, I loved it. And now I follow it. Mm-hmm. I don't watch it religiously, but on a weekend morning, if there's an F1 race, I'll flip it on and watch it. And now that you know some of the people and some of the, what do they call each crew manager? I don't know what their principal or something like that. Some of those guys. I know who the drivers are for some of the key teams. All of that is interesting to me. But then they tried it with the PGA, and I thought the first season they missed. Mm-hmm. The second season was better, but the first season, it didn't have the same kind of hook that the F1 series had. And I don't know if it was just because the sport was different. F1, some of the speed and the camera angles, and you can do more with that than you can do with golf. And I'm a huge golf fan, as you know, and I'm an avid golfer. But the show just wasn't quite as interesting. And the way they laid it out, they spent one series or one episode with these 2 guys, and then an episode with this guy, and an episode with this guy, as opposed to the F1 that covers the season. Even though it focuses on one team, it's still covering the season. Their second season was a lot better. And a lot of it had to do with the Ryder Cup was going on. Those shows were fascinating. So I'll be curious to see with the NHL if they can somehow follow a season and maybe intertwine the stories of all these guys. Because I think if it's just an episode that is, here's an episode on this guy, and you start out with some stuff in October, and then you go to some stuff in January and some stuff in February, I don't know if that'll have the same kind of a hook for fans that some of these, that the F1 series had. Because then the other thing that I'd compare it to would be the what HBO does with Hard Knocks. And their old training camp ones were great. They started doing in-season ones, and those are terrific.
Right.
Because it's actually a chronological thing, week to week to week. And that's the way people watch football. So I think they have to find a way to incorporate that. The behind-the-scenes stories are fascinating, but if it doesn't also tell the story of what's going on with the season, I don't know how long of a long-lasting
I think it will.
Thing
I mean, because I know that even because I saw the cameras, so they were with them throughout the year, and then all of a sudden, once the final started, the crews were embedded with guys like Kachuk and McDavid, Kachuk, Trouba, Draisaitl, Pasternak, Swayman, Hughes, Eichel, Nylander, Forsberg, and Landeskog were some of the, among others, were some of the people that had Amazon cameras around them. It's going to be a blast. I always tell you when I go to these NHL media tours, what I love about it is interviewing players that I've never interviewed before. And so, like, some of these guys are just there every year or every other year, and they're always great. The Eichels, the Draisaitl's, the McDavids, they always come feeling great. But the couple guys I wanted to point out this week that were unbelievable. Always Forsberg, but Shane Pinto. Suspended 41 games last year for proxy betting, which, what he says happened is that he was in Canada and he had friends of his in the United States basically betting on his behalf, which is illegal. But what a well-spoken kid. It was just tremendous to chat with him. All the time, and the only thing he was so good. I'm going to actually write a story about him.
The only thing I'd interject with that is I'm a little bit surprised that
they sent him.
That they sent him.
Yeah, I think it says something about him. Some of the times you have a guy there and they're thinking like, all right, like Cole Perfetti was there and you're like, Scheifele must not want to come. Holoduck
Right.
probably said
But
no.
Exactly. And
like,
I think that for sure. But in this case, you got a guy who knows he's going to have to answer questions about
and this
all
was
of this
really
other
the
stuff.
first time that he actually really talked about it.
I haven't heard him say anything about it.
And he did a podcast last week where he talked about it, but this was the first time with so I'm actually
because originally when it happened, his story was not that guys were betting on his behalf.
Yeah.
It was that somebody was betting with his user ID unbeknownst
which is sort
to
of
him.
well, unbeknownst is the difference. Like, but that is what happened. It had to be his user ID because that's how they were able to track it. Is that he's in Canada, they're in the United States, and blah blah blah. McKinnon was always great. One guy that I thought was just awesome as usual was Trocheck. Just sitting with him, the guy is hilarious. Wyatt Johnston, another one. Bedard was as good as I've ever seen him. But my favorite person to talk to was Mackenzie Weegar. You've never talked. I mean, there's no way that either of us have ever talked to him before.
I maybe
even
listened to him talk, maybe.
What a good
nothing
dude.
I remember.
Fun guy. And then, of course, Brandon Montour. So lots of cool stuff that happened there. And I always like it. Faber was in great spirits. I talked to him after we were done. I chatted with Faber because I'm going to be, I'm actually tomorrow getting with Spurgeon. I'm going to be doing a Spurgeon story next week. But the one thing Faber said is Spurgeon is absolutely flying right now. So that bodes well going into training camp is that, in Faber's mind, he looks 100% again, Anthony.
I've heard all the same things every time I've talked to anybody around that's been around him skating is that he looks like he's 100%. None of that surprises us. We knew he'd be a rehab monster with this, that he'd do everything as expected. But there's always that question at this point in a guy's career: can you continue to bounce back from these kind of injuries? And in this case, probably the most significant injuries that required surgery and an extensive rehab. Doesn't surprise me, but I think it's great news for the Wild.
Yeah, and I'll be interested, Anthony, to just see, like when I talk to him tomorrow, if there's any nerves with this, because obviously, he's 35, but there's still always, anytime a player comes back from a major injury, there's always the mental part, especially a defenseman that takes hits. This is a guy that had, his freaking feet were numbing last year. It was a scary thing. And so I have no doubt that medically he's 100%, but then now you got to deal with the physical toll of getting back to playing 24 minutes a night. And then
the mental part of being convinced that you're healthy enough to play the game the same way you've always played it.
Are you curious how they handle Faber this year? Like, do you let's be honest, if Spurgeon's around last year, we probably don't know how big of a asset that actually Spurgeon being hurt probably cost the Wild $8.5 million a year. But we don't know how good Faber is. He probably jumps to the forefront at some point, but he doesn't get the number one power play time, all that stuff. What's your, we haven't talked to John Hines yet. We will get with him in the coming days. But do you anticipate that Spurge will be back on the number one unit, or do you think that's Faber that's going to be there? How do you think this will impact him?
It's an interesting question. I don't think that I agree with you in that we might not have learned what we learned about Faber. He wouldn't have been playing 27 minutes a night.
Right.
I still think going into this year, he'll play more minutes than anybody else in the blue line, partially just because his legs are younger. So if I'm John Hines, I'm going to say, all right, Brock Faber can go 25 minutes. Brodin and Spurgeon are probably better if I can keep them at 22, 23. Middleton maybe even a couple notches below that. As far as the power play goes, it'll be interesting because I think Spurgeon would be better if he's a penalty kill guy and maybe the second power play group. I think
because the other interesting thing is you got Chisholm.
That's what I was just going to say. Is part of it is Declan Chisholm. If he's on your third pair and he can run the top power play, now you really got something because now Faber and Spurgeon split the time on your second power play group and you can use them both for penalty kill time. Because I thought it was a toll on Spurgeon to be the first guy out there on the penalty kill and trying to run the first power play.
The toll on Faber.
Well, on Spurgeon early in the year and then Faber later.
Yeah. Because I think it was a toll on Faber. I mean, if you actually look at him on the PK, he was on the ice for a ton of goals.
But if you say that now I've got Spurgeon and Faber that I can use on my penalty kill and I can split the second power play with those two guys and let Chisholm run the first, that's assuming that Chisholm continues to show that he can do that. He looked good doing it before, and he's got to be in the lineup. We don't know for certain that he's going to be in your top six.
Yeah.
So if he's a third pair guy that can run your top power play, that's a nice added bonus.
I talked to guys like Quinn Hughes, Nathan McKinnon, Connor McDavid, a bunch of people that had unbelievable rookie years, and then maybe not so much McDavid, but definitely McKinnon and Hughes, their second year struggled, and about sophomore slumps and the challenges of it. And McKinnon was really interesting. He said that part of what drove him his rookie year is that you go on the ice almost with a fear every night. You're at this level. And then all of a sudden when you realize that you could do it, you come back the next year and some of that fear kind of wanes, and that actually then affects you because you're not as sharp. You're almost going into games a little lackadaisical. And Faber just has a really good attitude about this. And, he is the one thing that he has said, and we might see his numbers come down based on the fact that he might not be on the number one power play because of Chisholm or Spurgeon's return, is that, he believes that sophomore slumps a lot of times have to do with stats. And he feels like he's got a gazillion other ways that he can impact the game, whether it's physically, logging big ice time, killing a big penalty, shutting down a McDavid or a McKinnon, that there are many ways that even if his numbers come down, that he could show his value.
Yeah, I think that's valid. I also think there's a difference when you're McKinnon and you're picked in the top 3 in the draft, and it's all about your numbers and your expectation level, where Faber, I think, is just more of to say he's more level-headed might be a misnomer and might be unfair to McKinnon because I think he's a level-headed guy too. Very. But it's just that Faber's more of everything he does is a bonus kind of guy. And the other thing I'd say about McKinnon is we're not around him every day, but from what I've heard, what really changed for him was diet. Jared Bednar coming in and then his diet and his fitness level and it was driven by, from what I've heard from other people in Denver, that it was Bednar coming in saying, you get yourself in this spot, you're going to be a tank that nobody can stop. And that changed his game.
Yeah, bad news. Nathan McKinnon looks in incredible shape if you're a Wild fan. We'll be right back.
Hey, it's Russo for Aquarius Home Services. The mega sale is here with up to 25% off Kinetico, the world's most efficient water treatment system. This system tackles problem water, operates without electricity, and delivers purified drinking water right from your faucet. As your independent authorized Kinetico dealer, Aquarius offers worry-free water solutions and mega savings starting with free water analysis. Don't miss out. Schedule your appointment now at AquariusHomeservices.com. Aquarius, earning the right to be recommended. I've had this system for 5 years, so don't forget, tell them that Russo sent you.
Royal Credit Union's smart checking accounts offer no monthly fees and no minimum balance. Make the switch to a Royal checking account, and you'll also get real-time transaction alerts, free mobile check deposits, and surcharge-free access to over 40,000 ATMs across the U.S. Enjoy financial freedom with no minimum balance and no monthly fees when you switch to Royal's smart checking account. Learn more and open your Royal Credit Union smart checking account online at rcu.org/go-checking. Insured by NCUA.
Michael Russo, Anthony LaPanta back here on Worst Seats in the House, September 19th, next Thursday, the night of the first day of Wild Training Camp. That'll be our next show. It's at Tuttles at 7 p.m. I did a couple stories from there. Actually, let's talk about this one. I wrote about Leon Draisaitl and Connor McDavid today, and obviously Draisaitl signs $14 million. Temporarily going to be the highest paid player in the league until Connor McDavid gets his extension next offseason, assuming that he extends with Edmonton and doesn't go into free agency, which I fully expect. Logically, I don't think that Leon Draisaitl commits to 8 years in Edmonton if he hasn't had explicit conversations with Connor McDavid to say we're doing this together. But the one thing that they both said that we talked about was, and Leon made it extremely clear, he did not take his contract to the limit. Like, he's at 15% of the cap. He could be much higher. You can max get 20% of the cap. But comparatively, like, NHL players are underpaid compared to the NBA, NFL, and Major League Baseball. Obviously, like, I mean,
yeah, you could. The other
Leon Draisaitl
say that those guys are overpaid in the other leagues.
Yeah, you could, but I mean, Draisaitl would be like the 92nd highest paid player in this,
right.
in NBA and 100 something in NFL.
And the NBA has a similar salary structure to the NHL in terms of the revenue sharing.
Right.
The difference is the roster is 60% of what an NHL roster is. The dollars are a little bit bigger because their national TV contracts are bigger. So they have to pay their guys more. And yes, if you said, all right, NHL, here, your cap is now going to be at the NBA's model, Draisaitl makes a lot more money. But when it's all relative to percentage,
50-50.
Right.
In the
and
NHL.
50-50, and it's 50-50 in the NBA. And the NBA's roster is much smaller.
Right.
So if you look at it in terms of share, like percentage of your team's cap, Draisaitl's doing just fine. And I actually think I'd look at it the other way and say NHL guys, I don't know if I'd say they're underpaid compared to NBA guys. I'd say they're probably paid the way pro athletes should be paid, and some others are overpaid.
But to the original point, like, the one thing I talked to both McDavid and Draisaitl is the fact that these are game-changing contracts. Like, I mean, if 20% of the cap when McDavid could re-sign, I think is going to be around $19.4 million if it's a $97 million cap that year. And so he could theoretically get 19.4. I bet he comes in less because he's going to want to continue to try to have a competitive team and all that stuff. He knows Evan Bouchard, who's only 2 years into his full career, 2 full years into his career, is going to be probably a $10 million defenseman. So they're going to want to. They got Nurse at 9, who's way overpaid. So they've got a situation where he's probably going to have to come in late. But what it is a game changer because, this upcoming year you got Rantanen and Marner up. In 2 years, we all know Kaprizov's up, Eichel's up, Connor's up, Panarin's up. By the way, it's a little unnerving that Panarin and Kaprizov are in the same year. But what it is going to do is it's going to change the numbers. Now Kaprizov, I've always used Pasternak as the number, like he shouldn't get more than Pasternak. But with a rising cap, he very well could say to the Wild, you know what? Sorry, 12, 13, 14. That's what I want. He hasn't achieved nearly what Draisaitl has, both in obviously production and in playoff success. I mean, they've won 6 playoff rounds in the last couple of years. But it's going to be really interesting now because this comes at a bad time for the Wild with Kaprizov.
It could. I've had a few people ask me this, and we talked about it briefly, I think, on last week's show about does Draisaitl signing affect what the number is for Kaprizov. I still don't know if it affects the number. I think the Wild are likely to give him. I don't think money is going to be the reason that he either signs or doesn't sign. I think it's going to be more like what does the team look like around him. And Draisaitl's number, I think it might actually help the Wild to some degree, because if you say, all right, well, Kirill, have you done more than Draisaitl's done? If you haven't, then how are you going to argue that you deserve that amount of money or more, even if the cap is a little bit bigger? And I think it might actually work in the Wild's favor. I just have always thought about this, that I don't think the dollars are going to be the deal breaker in this spot. The Wild are going to be willing to pay him what it would take to get him. He's going to make 12, 13, 14 million bucks a year. It isn't like the Wild are going to offer him 9 and try to get him to take a lowball thing. Right. It isn't like he's going to expect to get 17. They're going to land somewhere in a reasonable spot.
And to that point, that's what I've been saying for the last several months, is I think this is a crossroads season. I think they've got to prove to him that they can win here long term, that he can win here long term.
Yeah, and I think right now the perception would be that I believe in the plan. Mm-hmm. I think the only thing that could happen this year would be a step back. If, for whatever reason, some of the young guys didn't take the next step, some of the older guys weren't able to bounce back from injuries or subpar seasons. To me, I think I think right now the perception is that the plan is in place, the structure's there. Something could derail it in theory this year. And aside from that, I think right now it looks like everything's headed in the right direction.
A couple other stories that I wrote in The Athletic that if you're listening to this podcast, you can read. I wrote about the state income tax today and the advantages that clearly Florida, Tampa, Nashville, Dallas, and Seattle and Vegas
that's more of a story now than it ever used to be.
Well, that's part of what I wrote about, is that nobody was complaining when Tampa was the doormat of the league and Florida couldn't win a playoff round from 1996 to 2022. But these are good ownership groups with smart GMs, and these are destination teams, and they're in a cycle of winning, so it all plays a part. And when you are getting Reinhart signing at probably what would be undervalued compared to elsewhere, that's when you start to think about it. And so that's the only thing, is that the league actually does see this as an issue, but there's no easy way to fix it. So they're just going to monitor it. And, as Bill Daly said to us, is, basically when I asked the question, is that, they'll if the next 5 years, 10 years are a lot like the last 5, where 4 of the last 5 Stanley Cup winners are from teams with no state income taxes, 7 of the last 10 finalists are from teams with no state income taxes, that then they're going to have to maybe do something. He said that he has some ideas on how to address this, but both the league and the NHLPA, because I talked to an NHLPA source, really don't see this as an issue right now.
Yeah, and I think I've looked at it a few times and thought about it. And on one hand, it seems like it'd be a really easy math problem to put together a spreadsheet that says, this is what the cap is. If you're in a state that has no income tax, it can be this. The problem with it, obviously, is what if a player gets traded? Well, now his contract that was set up to be on Florida's math is now changed for this. But I think that's all a manageable thing. It could be, here's what your cap is, here's what your salary is, and then it gets prorated or extended or diminished, whatever.
I think the bigger, just to interrupt you for a second, I think the biggest issue from an advantage disadvantage standpoint is the luring of players to those high income taxes. Right. Because the one example I use today is Mackenzie Weegar, who makes, I think he signed the 8-year, he makes $6.125 million. Over the life of that contract, if he was still playing for the Florida Panthers, he'd be making $7-8 million more.
And so that's what I was going to say, is that I think now as the numbers get bigger, that becomes a bigger factor. But there's probably a way where you could say, we're going to make the cap be this, and then there'll be an extension for that for players that are in income tax states where they actually basically just get a bonus that covers their income tax. And so I think there are ways to do it, where now everybody's base salary would be the pre-income tax number, and I think there's a way you can make it work. But the only thing I would say is income tax isn't the only difference from city to city. There are some guys who
just want to be
in New York. And therefore they're willing to sign there because they want to play in a big market. Or what if it's that I got a family and Minnesota's a spot for that. I'd like to raise my family in Minnesota.
Certainly not for the taxes.
No, but I'm saying that there are other factors too. What about the fan base, the climate? I'd like to play where it's warm instead of where it's cold, or I'd like to play where it's cold instead of warm. I'd like to play in Vancouver because I love to go skiing, and so does my family. I mean, there are different things different cities have to offer that you can never make them all equal.
Right.
You just can't.
Yeah.
And income tax is one that seems like a really easy one because it's mathematics.
Yeah.
But I think there's also other things, like this place has better schools. Or are you going to try to say, okay, now if you sign there, you get a stipend because they've got better schools or worse schools? So I think you just kind of have to let it go and say that's part of the deal.
And it is, especially, by the way, here again in Minnesota. I mean, Minnesota, of the states that have NHL teams, Minnesota is the third highest taxes. There's California, New Jersey, New York.
Right. And look at how many guys choose to live here in the off season. Right. Which is, so Minnesota's not hurting to get free agents here because of high taxes. Right. They're not. I mean, if guys aren't coming here, it's not because of that. But other than Patrick Laine.
Yes, exactly. So he went to the really low-taxed Montreal. But if Kaprizov gets $12 million on his next contract, if he lived down in Florida, he'd make about $1.2 million more a year in real money than here. That's just a fact. Anthony, the other thing so we did this Q&A with Bill Daly, and expansion was a huge topic, and it is coming. I mean, obviously they're not in an official process, but it is coming. It's coming. And I don't even think it's going to be just 34 teams. Like, I think they might even go to 36. Like, if all of a sudden these expansion fees are $1.5-2 billion or something, it's coming, and it's going to be really fascinating how to do it, because one thing that Bill Daly pointed out to us is that everybody talks that there's 7 teams in Canada, and they just say 25 teams in the U.S., but they're really actually only in 22 markets, because obviously if you consider the Islanders, New Jersey, and New York are one market, and L.A. and Anaheim are one market, they have not maximized their exposure in the United States. So I think that Atlanta is definitely in the fold. Obviously, buildings are definitely needed. Arizona is another one. I think that they are going to eventually go back there if they can. But there's Houston, Kansas City, even Austin. But the other thing is, like, if you know that it could work, like, would you put a second team in Toronto? Like, I think if they go 4 expansion teams over a course of X amount of years, I think we actually could see an 8th team in Canada and probably in the Toronto market.
Yeah, if you're going back to Canada, that makes more sense than any other Canadian city.
And how rich would it be if they win a cup before the league?
Yeah, well, everybody's always talked about Quebec, and another team in Toronto makes more sense. Yeah, but to me, Houston is going to happen. Arizona probably going to happen if they get their arena done. I know there's been so much talk in Atlanta. Kansas City is the interesting one because it seems like a no-brainer to be there, but it just doesn't seem like a real avid hockey market. Yeah. Maybe it can change.
I've only been there one day in my life. It was for a Wild Blues exhibition game once at the Sprint Center, and it was an awesome venue. Awesome place across the street, all that. But that is the only thing that I remember really about Kansas City is how awful the airport was. Worst airport I think I've ever been.
And it's hard to get. It's not easy to get to. It's not located conveniently or anything. And I love Kansas City for a baseball town, but it just doesn't seem like a logical fit for the NHL, even though it seems like a logical fit because of the market size and where it is. But for whatever reason, it just doesn't seem like a avid hockey fan base there. So I don't know. I think it's a no-brainer. There's going to be 2 more teams, but if they do go 4 more, I think a second team in Toronto. And I know they talked about this a little bit. I remember maybe 4 or 5 years ago that the subject had come up, and that the Maple Leafs obviously wouldn't love it. But when you start to look at it and say, well, if Toronto is the city it is, why can New York support 2 baseball teams, 3 hockey teams, 2 football teams? Why can Chicago support a couple baseball teams? If those things are all true, LA, Anaheim area, multiple teams in every sport, why can't Toronto?
White Sox, though, are a minor league team.
Well, yeah.
LTIR, that was something that I found very interesting from Bill Daly, because they have long poo-pooed this being an issue. And, hey, we monitor and scrutinize all these injuries and making sure the teams like Tampa Bay and Vegas were not, taking advantage of it. But Bill Daly did admit that they've come to a closer point now than they've ever had, where 32 GMs or the majority of the 32 GMs are saying, yeah, there's got to be a way to tweak this. So I do think it's coming in the next CBA, and there should be.
It has to.
Yeah.
There's no question. We've talked about it enough times on this show that I've always felt like it's been like a false front from them saying, we're not worried about it. Nobody's worried about it. I know people are worried about it. Every city we visit, you hear people grumbling about it behind the scenes. Mm-hmm. It has to happen. It's a no-brainer.
Yeah, I agree with you. Let's take a quick break.
We do want to thank Twill and the Edina Galleria. I don't know if you've been to the Edina Galleria. It's a beautiful place to shop, a very comfortable place to shop, easy parking, easy in and out, really good restaurants there to hang out in if you want to do that. But if you walk by Twill, you'll see that the shop reflects their products. It's a very down-to-earth, easygoing, attractive space with expert associates working there who are not pushy at all. They're just there to answer your questions and help steer you in the right direction if you need steering. And you go in there and just walk by, get a look, and then go back when you want to buy clothes for yourself, when you buy somebody a present, whatever the case might be. Go in and realize that Scott Dayton handpicks everything in his shop. Scott Dayton's the proprietor. It is Twill by Scott Dayton. Scott's been a friend of mine and has been supporting this network for a long time. I buy all of my clothes there. My wife loves the place. Every time we go in there, we buy more than we expected to buy because my wife likes it so much. Their stuff fits. It wears well. I just went on a European vacation where everything I wore was from Twill because you get out of an 8-hour flight and you're not even wrinkled. The stuff just wears well. You can buy everything from golf, from running shoes, walking shoes, golf shorts to beautiful Italian suits that you can wear anywhere, to any occasion. So just check out twillmn.com, sign up for their email notifications. They will not spam you. They'll just send you something if they're going to have a special event.
If you're grilling steaks or cooking steaks anyway, the best place to get them is at Feller's Ranch. You can go to fellersranch.com. It's Minnesota's premier Wagyu ranch. Their Wagyu is unbelievable. The marbling is second to none. The ribeyes are terrific. We've had the New York strips recently. You can find them at a few local restaurants, but you can also have them delivered to your home. Their vans are in the cities a couple times a week. They're available at a couple of butcher shops. Just check it out at fellersranch.com and you won't be disappointed.
Back here, Worst Seats in the House, Michael Russo, Anthony LaPanta. September 19th is our next live show at Tuttles. Anthony, let's go.
We should mention that Margot has settled down.
Yeah.
We got to give her credit.
She's had about 7 drinks
she was riled up when we started, and rightfully so. I think it could be this candle. Coffee, pumpkin, nutmeg candle.
What is it, like lavender?
No, I said coffee, pumpkin,
But
nutmeg.
is there is there some sort of calming mechanism in there?
I don't know, but I feel calm, don't you?
Yeah. You're always calm.
But Margot's settled down, so give her some credit. She started out riled
an
up.
Entire cow behind you too. Look at how much beef has been cut.
Well,
with the sharpest knife ever, I might add.
It is a sharp knife.
Yeah,
but
she basically took out her frustration on the steak.
Why do you think I handed her a half a cow of raw steak when she had a knife in her hand?
Yeah, exactly. She's giving me the move along signal. All right, Anthony, let's go back to Wild training camp here. I'm excited. I know you're excited. You know, one thing that I don't know if you're able to break news here, but a lot of people did ask on Twitter is, do you know the preseason TV schedule? Are you able to point that out? Or
we're doing 3. We always do 3, but this year 2 of the 3 are on the road. It had to do with twin schedules. So we've got the first one's in Dallas on the 25th, and then we have the 2 Chicago games, one home, one away, in early October. I can't remember the dates, but it's the 2 Chicago games to end preseason.
Hopefully they keep Spurgeon out of that game.
So we are not we're not doing the game in Winnipeg, but we've got the other 2 road games.
Yeah. Although the person that hurt him last year actually now is a Wild player, Reese Johnson, who's a good player. So just actually, he's going to get games this year. Who knows if they have injuries, even that can make a run at a roster spot. Let's talk about training camp, Anthony. What's your biggest question coming into camp? Me, the goaltending.
Goaltending for sure is a part of the question. I really think for me the biggest question is just the camp itself. This will be our first camp with John Hines. It's a coaching staff that is almost entirely turned over. In fact, the whole staff is different from 3 years? Was it 3 years ago Freddie Shabbat came in?
Yep.
He's the longest tenured assistant coach now on the staff, which is amazing to think about. So I'm really curious to just see that dynamic, see how he runs the camp, how their systems are different. He was a little bit hands tied last year when you come in the middle. So that's the kind of thing I want to see is, yes, goaltending for sure. And I want to see who ends up on the first line with Zuccarello and Kaprizov, and all of those kind of things are interesting. But I want to see more about how does a penalty kill look different? How does a power play look different? How does just the way camp is run look different? And what's the dynamic like? For years, it was a coaching staff that had guys who had been together for a long time. I mean, if you go back to when it was even a couple of years back where it was Darby and Bruno and Bob Mason, and these guys have been together forever. Yeah. And then you added Bob Woods and Dean Evison, those guys, they had been together for a long time. Now you've got a staff that is largely made up of guys that haven't been together very long. So I'm curious. I'll be watching that. Like, how does that kind of chemistry work?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, TJ Tindra and who's one of their assistant coaches, and Jonas Plum have been around for a while. But on the bench, Jason King, Pat Dwyer, and
Pat Dwyer came up in the middle of last season. Yep. King was new last season. Yep. Capilano's new this season. Hines is new halfway through last season. So to some degree, Shabbat's been here, I think it's 3 years. Am I right about that? Or is it 4? I can't remember for sure. But
I think it's 3.
But it's those guys that are the most integral on game night. This is their first full season together with a camp. So that's one of the things I'll be really curious to see during training camp.
Yep. I'll be interested to see lines. No.
I'll be watching your live tweets.
Yeah, exactly. But to that point, Marco Rossi is going to be really fascinating where they plug him in. Is he the first or second line center? Is he third line center? Rossi said the other day that he has not been told at all that there's a chance he'll play wing. So you and I kind of maybe on last week's show sort of conjecture if maybe they try him at second line left wing with an Eriksson Ek and a Boldy. That so far doesn't at least been communicated to him, so I don't think that's something they're thinking about. So they're looking at him as a center. Where does Trennan play? Does Goudreau play on the fourth line? Does Ogren play second line left wing? Where the heck is Marcus Johansson part of this? It's going to be just really interesting out of camp, and everything is going to be contingent, obviously, on injuries as well. Like the best plans sometimes can get ruined, as we saw last year when Spurgeon gets hurt in training camp, and game 2 of the season, Boldy and Goudreau are hurt, and then Goligoski's hurt playing in practice, hit by a Brodin shot in game 3. Like it was nuts.
Well, and I think a lot of that, if you really think about it, what it all starts with is Ryan Hartman. We're assuming that Ryan Hartman's going to get the first shot between Kaprizov and Zuccarello, which actually, to go back even one level, we're assuming that means Kaprizov and Zuccarello are guaranteed to be together on that top line. That may not last.
Right.
I mean, we don't know. But assuming that lasts, then does Ryan Hartman show that they can rediscover what they had a couple of years ago? Because if not, who lands there? Marco Rossi might be the most logical guy, but if Hartman's there, then all the other decisions start to trickle down from that spot. So to me, it really begins with, we're going off the assumption that Kaprizov and Zuccarello will be together. Can Ryan Hartman be the guy between them? And even if he can, it might not be the best way the whole roster shakes down, because you could look at it another way and say, is the roster better with Ryan Hartman playing on a third line with Foligno and Trennan, Boldy, Eriksson Ek, and either Ogren or Johansson on a second line with Rossi between Kaprizov and Zuccarello. There's a part of me that says that even if it's maybe not best for Hartman or best for Kaprizov, it might be best for the team to have that and to have a third line that has Hartman, Foligno, and Trennan. That's a heck of a third line.
Yeah, that's the value of Ryan Hartman is he's so versatile, whether it's position, whether it's style, whether it's whether it's top.
Think of him as a third line center.
I agree. Like to me, like a Foligno, Trennan, Hartman, Foligno, Hartman, Trennan line looks really to me intriguing, at least in my brain. But it definitely seems like they would love to see if they can figure out a way to get.
So now if Hartman does fit with the top group, now what do you do with Marco Rossi? Does he really fit as a third line center with those two guys?
Yeah.
Or that's why I just threw out that I hadn't talked to anybody about him playing wing. I was just thinking, all right, well, he's a guy that seems more of a top six type skill set than a third line center. And I mean, who knows? Maybe he does. Maybe he fits with Boldy and Eriksson Ek's your third line center. And all of a sudden, Eriksson Ek, Foligno, and Trennan, could they be the kind of line that Eriksson Ek, Foligno, and Greenway were a couple of years ago, where on paper they might have been your third line, but they played a much bigger role than what you'd think of as a third line type forward group. So I just think there's a lot of flexibility, but it all starts with what does Ryan Hartman look like coming into this year's camp?
Right. Rossi, Joe Smith did a story on Monday at The Athletic, and he did a Riley Heidt story today. Riley Heidt's an intriguing player as well. Right now, without injuries, a significant injury because they would need LTI. I don't see how Heidt can make the team. But obviously you could throw somebody on waivers. You could trade somebody if all of a sudden he demands a roster spot. But right now, if
he comes in and lights it up and looks like he's ready to be a top six NHL forward, they'll figure out a way to keep him.
But right now, if they're going to keep three goalies on the team, they can't even afford them. So that's just a fact. If you do the math.
No, but that's what I'm saying is that let's say he comes into camp and he's brilliant and he looks like he is for sure ready to be a top six guy in the NHL. Then you make other adjustments.
Yeah.
Then you don't go three goalies, or then you waive one of your defensemen, or whatever you have to do. You make that work.
If I had to guess right now, I don't think he's here. Like it just because. Like Marco Rossi led the league in preseason points 2 years ago, and we all thought he was ready, and he showed that he absolutely was not. And so, like, even if Riley Heidt lights it up in preseason games, can you really even take something from that? And that's why I don't know to sit there and trade guys and throw guys on waivers based on a 19-year-old.
But you could do it for you could do it for a few games at the start of the season. Start with two goalies. And then just see, and if all of a sudden it's like, okay, what we saw in the preseason is not real. Let's let him go develop for another year, bring up our third goalie, move on from there.
That's a great point because, you and I are sort of our conjecture is that if Jesper Wallstedt's going to make his season debut, it's probably that game in St. Louis. So you could theoretically go, 3 games and throw him down in Iowa and then call him up and you give almost Heidt that little look. So we'll see, but you also need a spot for him to play, right? I mean, that's the thing.
Right.
Yeah, because
that all starts with training camp. Does he look like a guy? Do you think he's ready to be a top 6 NHL guy?
And obviously, if he shows it and you need some more cap space, you could technically start Ogren or Huzandinov down there because, he would need a spot to play in the lineup. And they have 13 forwards now, if you include Lauko, who they picked up this year. The goaltending, though, Anthony, is like this season, you and I have discussed a lot. It really seems to me, assuming he's not traded, really rely on Philip Gustafsson proving that he is the Philip Gustafsson that we saw 2 years ago. Like, they can make all the improvements they want. Hartman can be a 30-goal guy again. Foligno can stay healthy. Spurgeon can look good. But if they don't get goaltending, if their goaltending is like last year, they're just not going to make the playoffs.
But that could be Wallstedt, too. So I think you have a pretty good idea what you're going to get from Marc-Andre Fleury at this point in his career. He isn't going to play 65 games. He isn't going to win the Vezina. But he's going to be good. He's going to have games where he steals a game or two. He's going to have games where he looks like a guy who is 40 years old. And because of that, you might be able to count on him and he'll probably argue this, but you could count on him for 30, 35, maybe even 40 games if you had to, but not 65. So I think it comes down to one of the other two guys has to either Gus has to look like Gus looked 2 years ago, or Wallstedt has to look like the prospect everybody's thought he is. And if either one of those things happen, or both, then you got something.
I got to buy this candle. I like it.
I told you, I thought
great.
you seemed like you were soothed.
It is. It smells incredible.
Yeah.
It's like a mixture of pumpkin and
And
vanilla.
just remember, it was coffee, pumpkin, and nutmeg.
Coffee.
Right.
So I just was up in upstate Georgia, and you would have loved me.
You were questioning what the three things were? Right, but the ingredients are coffee, pumpkin, nutmeg.
So I went to a thing up in upstate Georgia, hung out with my brother, his sister-in-law, my nephews, and a bunch of old friends up at the summer camp that we used to go to. At my age, shouldn't be walking around a summer camp a lot, and playing a bunch of sports and all that stuff. Like the next day, I could not walk, basically.
Like,
And then it
give
was,
me
like,
an idea of
magically-
like a bunch of sports. Like, what were you playing?
I threw the frisbee. So anyway,
So that's not a
there's lots
bunch
of
of
hills.
sports.
There's lots of hills.
Right. I get walking can be, I walked a golf course today. That can up a lot of hills. That can be tough.
Yeah.
But you said you played a bunch of sports. Like what?
I shot the basketball a bit.
Huh. Like how many shots?
A couple. Hurt my arm doing it. But honestly, like the next day, all of a sudden, I forget who it was. I forgot who it was, but all of a sudden they just like, "Are you limping?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm limping." It's like, and bad. And then, I mean, honestly, then I got to New York City. We had a meeting at the New York Times office, and I could barely walk around the city. But then the next day, it was like magically fixed. Another thing, and anybody that's an avid traveler on Delta is going to really appreciate the story. So you get with your status, you get a finite amount of what they're called regional upgrade certificates a year, and they're certificates that. So when you're diamond, a lot of times you'll get upgraded within 5 days of a flight. But if it's a super long trek, you want to use one of these regional upgrades to like months earlier upgrade yourself. But there's a very few amount that you get. Okay, so I'm flying from JFK to Vegas for the media tour. 6-hour flight almost. So I'm like, I am using one of these regional upgrades. I get to the airport and I'm looking at the departure lounge at the gate. And I go to the woman. I'm like, how many people are on this flight? She's like, about 45 on a jumbo jet. And I'm like, the entire flight, I could not get out of my head how I wasted one of these regional upgrades. It's still bothering me. There are 45 people on the flight, and like half the first class seats were empty. So I would have been automatically upgraded. And so now I honestly, it has been bothering me for 4 days that I threw away one of these precious regional upgrades. Andy.
Yeah, I don't have any precious regional upgrades, nor do I have whatever status you said you have.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter to me.
Yeah.
So you might as well have been speaking Greek.
So yesterday morning, I wake up in Vegas and I walk. I'm like, I got up so early that I was staying at the Westin, had to go to the Encore. I'm like, instead of taking the Uber, I'm just going to walk there. So I had to be there at 8:15. So 6:30, I decided to go outside and start my walk just to get there early, go have breakfast, all that stuff. I walk outside and I'm like, what is going on here? Like, it is completely like you've never seen Vegas before. Foggy, could not breathe. I mean, truly could not breathe. And the second that you walk outside, your eyes start burning. And it was all those forest fires that were in the Palm Springs area of California going there. It blanketed Vegas with the smoke.
Oh,
and
boy.
I know that we normally get
We get a
Alberta
little bit
fire
from the Canadian
but
ones,
I have
yeah.
never experienced this. Like, you would have thought Vegas was absolutely on fire.
Huh. And I've heard it's been really hot there.
Yeah.
Like unseasonably hot, hotter
Yeah.
than normal, like 110-ish.
Yeah.
Was it that hot?
Yeah, it wasn't 110, but it wasn't the greatest trip to Vegas just because you could go. Like, I thought it was funny. So the Clark County actually put out a warning suggesting that everybody just stay in the casinos. Every casino's like, yeah, that's a good
That'd be
idea.
a perfect
Stay-
idea.
Just you shelter in place at the craps table. That's a perfect thing. And then last night went out with Elliot Friedman and Gary Lawless, our old buddy from Vegas Golden Knights, and an NHL exec. We went to the Bally's, the Gordon Ramsay Steakhouse at Paris. Sensational, most expensive restaurant I think I've ever been to in my life, though.
Really? And
And we've eaten at some expensive
Yeah, but I don't
restaurants.
remember. Did you eat
But this
there?
would have even made Margot turn.
Yeah, but I've eaten there once, and I don't remember it being ungodly expensive.
I'm telling you, like a filet mignon there is $107.
I think Vegas has gotten more expensive even in the last year.
But this, like, you go to Mastro's and you can have a filet and it's like $70 or something, which I know everybody's looking like that's expensive. 107 is like the
I
cheapest
wouldn't
steak
pay
on their menu.
$100 for a steak.
I bet you would have.
I mean, I might have if I had walked in with you guys last night, but when I went there before, it was for sure not over $100. But I had I'm trying to remember who it was. Somebody else, a friend of mine, was just in Vegas, I don't know, maybe a month ago, and they said that they had gone down they went to some place and like to have a cocktail before dinner, and that the cocktails were $30.
Yeah, no, the same thing.
And
it's nuts.
Right. And I was like, you know what? I've always thought it was a little bit expensive on the Strip, but not. It hasn't been like that.
Like when I first started going there when I was 21, the days of going to like the old Barbary Coast, which is now the Cromwell, and having like a $3.99 breakfast. Remember those days?
Yeah,
where you
I
could
do
actually
remember
go to
those
Vegas
days. But I'm just saying, like there have always been ways to go and enjoy Vegas without breaking the bank.
But now it's hard.
It's harder, and I think it's changed in the last 6 months.
Yeah,
because we were there during the Super Bowl. So of all the times where you'd think it was, this is where everything's going to like. They're going to charge you whatever they want. I was shocked how it was not that way during this is when the Super Bowl was in Vegas.
Yeah.
And I remember walking up and down the Strip thinking, I thought craps tables were going to be $30, $40 minimums no matter what. They weren't. We had a couple cocktails at a place outside of where'd we go? Not outside Bellagio. You weren't?
I don't think so.
Really?
Yeah, no. Joe Smith covered that again.
When were you there with me?
Well, we had another trip there and we went to a bunch of speakeasies.
We did.
Yeah, that one behind
That's right.
Caesars.
At Caesars, we
Cosmo.
sat at the outsides.
Yeah.
But even that, it wasn't that expensive.
That was when I got the Liquid Death and you were making fun of me.
You did, because you paid like $11 for a bottle of water.
Yeah, but it was cold.
It was really cold water.
Yeah.
That's true. But so we went that night. It wasn't that expensive. But on Super Bowl weekend, I had gone to a couple.
$11 for water is pretty expensive.
But it was Liquid Death water. It was really cold water. But because we had cocktails for like $11 that had alcohol in them and everything. It was great. But I just remember then, combined with our Super Bowl trip, thinking, all right, I expected worse.
Yeah.
But then I had just talked to somebody, I think it was one of my high school buddies or something, that had just been out there maybe a month or so ago and said, it's absurd how expensive it is right now.
Even hotel costs. I mean, there was a time with Vegas, I mean, that was their thing. You knew you can go there and stay cheap at any of the nice casinos because they just wanted to get you into the casino.
Right.
And now it's not even that anymore. I mean, you're paying $300, $400, $500 a night if you're first of all, if you don't book real early enough. But anyway, a couple more questions. I love this snark. The Hockey Science wants to go, what is Anthony's secret to being so overly optimistic about this team? I like to steal it, but apply it to real life.
Well, I really don't think I'm overly optimistic. I think I'd like to say I'm realistic, where I think this is a playoff team, but not a Stanley Cup contender. I don't think that's overly optimistic. I think they'll be better than they were last year. They'll be deeper. They'll be able to withstand injuries better than they did last year. They've got more flexibility with the roster and the lineup. And I think that's a realistic approach. If they get goaltending like they had 2 years ago, they could be a team that could finish in the top half of the West in terms of the playoff teams. If they get goaltending like they got last year, they're going to have a hard time making the playoffs. I think it's that simple. I don't think that's an unfairly optimistic take. I think that's a realistic look at this roster.
Paul asks, there were a lot of down years from guys last year: Hartman, Foligno, Freddie, JoJo, etc. We know a lot of them were injured. Who is the one that you were counting on turning it around and improving our team? I think Hartman, he's such a proud guy. And I think it actually bothers him that he scored 21 goals and people lump him into those players.
Right.
And I bet you he's going to come in with a little axe to grind this year.
I agree. And I think Foligno's a misnomer. I think a lot of people look at him and say he had a down year. The reality is I think he just didn't score quite as much and he was hurt. But I thought he actually, I didn't think his game slipped much.
No, his defensive metrics were elite.
Really good. Yeah. And Hartman, I think, is the guy that we'll see his numbers spike. But to say a guy had 21 in a down year for a guy that Yeah, I mean, what's your expectation for him? 25?
Yeah.
So then is 21 really a down year? I think we'll see him. I think he scores 30 this year.
Yeah. I'd love to say, like, I think Freddie scores more than 5. How much more, though? That's the issue, because
Yeah, I
he's
don't know
going
if
to
he's
be
going to
fourth
get
line.
19 again.
Right. Like, but the thing is, if they are healthy, he's probably a fourth liner on this team.
Right.
Maybe
And
he
could
gets
be
on
a
the
really
second
good
unit,
fourth line guy. But the difference for him was when he scored 19 and then 11 and then 19, it wasn't like he was playing first line center, but he was getting occasional looks as a second line guy, just based on, when guys were banged up. And even if he spent most of the year on the third line, he spent some on the second. That's probably not going to happen. So he isn't going to get back to 19, but 10 seems like a reasonable season for him.
Nate's a couple more. Nate asked, with the progression of Halabai over the summer, any chance he sees any time with the Wild this year? I mean, again, they have 3 goalies, and he's clearly the 4th. So if he's going to see time here this year, it's going to, they would have either had to trade Gus, or there's going to be significant injuries for him to get time. But I don't think that means he doesn't have a future in the organization. In fact, I think he probably does. I know they're very, very excited about him. 2 more. Joseph asked, are you hearing anything about a new Rossi deal? The 2020 class is starting to sign their second deals. Yeah, we just learned that with Seth Jarvis. Obviously, Anton Lundell got huge deals. And as Joseph points out, that the Cole Perfetti contract that Cole told me the other day is getting close. Feels like it'll set the market for Marco. Their numbers are equivalent. Actually, Cole's had, because he had 19 last year, but the year before he had double digits too, or Marco didn't. It's probably a good comparable, but they're not going to sign him right now. There's no
Perfetti's just a year ahead of Marco probably in that development.
Yeah. And Cole is an unsigned RFA, or Marco's under contract. So there's no rush. If it was going to happen, it had happened by now. Final question of the show. Mark M wants to know, what's the best side dish at a LaPanta cookout?
Well, it really depends on what we're having, but I would
like
say
your sweet potato with the, what do you guys throw in that?
Well,
it's like a spice.
Yeah, there's a few different kinds we make. If we make whipped sweet potatoes, I put a lot. Rosemary. It's paprika and rosemary and garlic. I actually think the best one is probably I'm going to say the citrus risotto that we make when we do a sea bass with a Mediterranean relish on top.
Never had it either.
No, but the citrus risotto I think is really good. I actually asked Margot, what's your favorite side that we have, Margot?
Margot, come to the mic.
Well, just throw it out. We do a fair number of salads. You know what? Actually, I'll go with that. The tomato, cucumber, peach, raspberry salad, watermelon. Yeah. It has all those mixed together. We stole it from Bill, whatever his name is. There was a chef that we went to his house for dinner one night. We've tweaked it a little bit. It's a great summer side.
Yeah. My favorite thing when I come over here and Margot makes dinner, and they're always great. My favorite's actually I think it's like a cauliflower rice with like chicken and stuff in it. It's like super moist. But my favorite thing about it is when she makes a great dinner and you don't take a picture of it, and she gets all pissed off that you feel like everything you make is Twitter worthy and nothing that she makes is picture worthy.
She usually does that. It's kind of a no-win situation for me, to be honest, because she doesn't want me to take pictures of the dinner, but then if I don't take the picture of the dinner, I'm wrong there too.
Yeah. Well, you were
I gotta go and move some logs.
Yeah, you were definitely things have calmed down since I last walked.
It's the candle. Coffee, pumpkin, nutmeg.
She was dropping F-bombs, and then right before we went on, she went on another rant that she found a bug in her bathroom and the shower was broken, and so I feel like I'm going to let you guys eat and deal with the.
We're going to open some Portuguese red and eat whatever it is she's been making behind us during this whole show.
Yeah, exactly.
I won't take a picture, though.
Next live show is September 19th at Tuttles. That's next Thursday. That is the night of the first day of training camp. So we will have a lot to talk about. And those live shows at Tuttles are always a blast. So 7 p.m. Come on out Thursday night at September 19th. And then our 2 shows, mark your calendars now, in October that are live, at least, is October 2nd at Elsie's, right in Northeast Minneapolis. Very fun spot in the ballroom there. And And then Split Rocks is October 30th after we get back from that 7-game road trip. And I think that's the day we get back from Pittsburgh. So I'll be super excited and probably weigh about 10 pounds more than I do now. All right. Thanks to our sponsors. Thanks for joining us in the Aquarius Home Services studio. Thanks to Aquarius Home Services, who are a local authorized dealer for Connecticut water treatment systems, Royal Credit Union, and of course, always Twill in the Edina Galleria. Thanks to Scott Dayton, who's been with us for many, many years. Talk to you next week, everybody, at Tuttles, September 19th.